everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Danielle Daw, Adult Services Librarian at the Halton Hills Public Library, and your host for this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which many of us gather tonight is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I also want to thank the Friends of the Halton Hills Public Library for their continual support of our One Book, One Halton Hills program. This is actually our 10th anniversary of the program, and we look forward to introducing more great Canadian authors and books to the community. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I'd also like to take a moment to explain how the Q&A portion of tonight's event will work. You are welcome to ask questions at any time during the presentation through the chat box. Now, if you're on a computer, a button in the bottom menu of Zoom should show you how to open the chat. And if you're on a phone or a tablet, the location of the chat will differ based on your device. So for example, I have an Android phone, and I go to the bottom menu and find the button that says More, and then it opens up to show the chat. One of our library associates, Shanine, is also monitoring the chat tonight, so you're welcome to reach out to her if need be. And as a final note, we are recording this presentation and we'll upload it to YouTube next week. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our One Book, One Halton Hills author, Karma Brown. Karma Brown is the best-selling author of 5 novels, including our One Book selection, Recipe for a Perfect Wife. Her novels feature female protagonists who confront difficult challenges, including infertility, loss of a loved one, and even sudden loss of memory. Recipe for a Perfect Wife continued the theme by juxtaposing 2 housewives fighting for their place in patriarchal society. In addition to her novels, Karma is also an award-winning journalist who has been published in numerous magazines, including Canadian Living, Chatelaine, and Today's Parent. This winter, she will also release a new book called The 4% Fix: How 1 Hour Can Change Your Life. And it actually discusses the strategies she used to find time to write her debut novel. So now, without further ado, here is Karma Brown.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I am really happy to be here. I'm sorry that we can't do this in person. I know that, everyone's probably getting used to Zoom or getting more used to Zoom. I am definitely appreciative that we have Zoom. I do miss the energy of the face-to-face and being in the room with everyone. But so on that note, as we go, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them in a less formal way. We don't have to wait for Q&A at the end. I'm happy to answer any questions about anything at any time. I really am an open book, to use a cliche, which authors are never supposed to do, but I actually quite like cliches, so sometimes I find ways to use them. But I was really honored to have Recipe chosen for the One Book, One Halton, and thank you so much for the library and for Danielle for organizing all of this to make it possible to be here tonight. So I can't really see everyone. I'm trying to see if I have a gallery view now. Okay. One of the things that I sometimes like to do at the beginning is just to read the first chapter. But I like to see if I can get a show of hands, maybe, who likes to hear the author read a little bit. If you don't, you can just, okay, there's a few hands going up. You can do a thumbs down. It's okay. Okay. So I will do the first chapter. It's short. And then I'll talk a little bit about how this book came to be and what research that I did, that went into it, and then just take questions as they come. So thanks for being here. I hope that we have some fun tonight. So I will start. This is the Canadian cover. So that's the thing. There is a US cover that looks a little different and a UK cover that also looks different, but this will be the one that's probably familiar to everyone. And chapter 1, here we go. I was just telling the ladies before we started that I am not an actor. I am not a very skilled reader of my own books. So just bear with me, and let's hope this goes okay. Chapter 1. You seem to forget that I am married, and the one charm of marriage is that it makes a life of deception absolutely necessary for both parties. Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, 1890. It was late in both day and season for planting, but she had no choice in the matter. Her husband hadn't understood the urgency, having never nurtured a garden. nor did he hold an appreciation for its bounty, and as a result had been gently irritable with her that morning, wishing she would focus on more important tasks instead, of which there were many, as they'd moved in only the week before. It was true much of the garden could wait. Little happened during these later months as bulbs rested dormant, waiting for the rain and warmth of spring. But this particular plant, with its bell-shaped flowers plentiful, would not be so patient. Besides, it was a gift and came with specific instructions, so there was no alternative but to get it into the ground today. She felt most like herself when she was mucking about in the dirt, singing to and coaxing the buds and leaves. That had been the main reason she loved the house when she first saw it. The garden beds were already prepped, though sparse, and she could envision how they could be transformed into something magnificent. The house itself had felt large and impersonal, especially its many rooms, considering it was only the two of them. However, they were newlyweds still, plenty of time to make the house a home, to fill it with children and warmth. Humming a favorite tune, she slid on her gardening gloves as she crouched and, with the trowel, dug out a large circle of earth. Into the hole went the plant, which she held carefully with her gloved fingers, so as not to crush the amethyst-colored blossoms. She was comforted as she patted the soil around its roots, the stalks standing nice and straight, the flowers already brightening up the garden. There was plenty of work still ahead, but she lay down on the soft grass, her hands resting like a pillow under her head, and watched the clouds dance in the blue sky above, excited and ready for all that was to come. I made it. I didn't even stumble over one word. So there we go, chapter 1. This book, thank you for this. I appreciate it. Thumbs up, and because I can't hear any of you, but I can see smiles, so thank you. This book, it was an interesting one for me because I had my debut novel published in 2015. And at the time it was a 2-book deal, which is often what happens with publishers. They buy the book that you have written and then they want your next book, which sometimes is written, but most often not. And so after I had handed my first manuscript in and they were preparing it for publication, we started talking about what this next book could be. And I had this vision of, I love vintage cookbooks. I always have. I have a few that have been passed down through my family. I have great memories of cooking with my mom out of this one here, the Betty Crocker picture cookbook, which some people may recognize. It's very, old, but my mom puts a lot of notes in the margins. And so I grew up with that sort of way of cooking, I guess, where she would make a recipe and write what date it was and what was happening that day and how we felt about the recipe. And so in and amongst all the spills that go onto cookbook pages and those little notes, they feel very much like, I feel pretty nostalgic about these books. And I also really feel like cookbooks are sort of a legacy for women. They, back when my mom first got married, she received her first cookbook as a wedding shower gift. And, which we can talk about that later, but what it means to get a cookbook as you're about to get married, which really feeds into the themes of the book. But, I really did appreciate that she loved her cookbooks. And so there was something special for me in that. And I had this vision of Nellie who, just in her garden, smoking one of her cigarettes, looking at the plants, maybe having cut some flowers and thinking about the meatloaf she was going to make for her husband in this 1950s tableau. And I also then realized that she had a secret about her marriage. And those things just came together for me. So the opportunity to write about food and to write about this legacy of cookbooks and passing them down between families and between women felt really powerful to me. So I pitched it as my second novel. And I had been writing, my first book was quite emotional and a real tissues required type of story. And my publisher wanted another book like that. And this one was a little darker and was exploring different themes. And so they passed on this one and we went in another direction. But I kept that book. I kept the idea for this story. It just wouldn't leave me. So I started working on it. And I wrote it over probably about 5 years. While I was writing another 3 books for my publisher. And then it just was finished. And I decided that I would try to pitch it to a different publisher. So that's what happened. And it sold. And here we are. So, I have a lot of books that have maybe 10,000 words written sitting in a folder. And maybe I'll go back to some of them one day, but this one it wouldn't leave me. And as soon as I thought about what I wanted to say with the story, not just about this idea of women's voices and this sort of magical ability of women who maybe didn't have a voice back in the 50s, being able to have a voice through their cooking and through the things that they were making and through these cookbooks. I knew that I wanted to also explore marriage today. And I've been married for 15 years, very happily. So, my husband, who was often concerned with my Google searches, if you have read the book and finished it, you will understand why. I'm probably on some kind of watch list somewhere here, but it just, I knew I wanted to explore this idea of marriage in the present day. And if we've come as far as we think that we have, or as society would like us to believe that we have. And in writing about that, it also forced me to look at how I feel about feminism and marriage. I have a daughter who's 12, so it's very top of mind for me all the time about the world that she's being raised in, and role modeling that for her. So yeah, that was how this book came to be. It was a joy to write from beginning to end. I say that now. I am probably romanticizing the process a little bit. There were surely times that I was not super happy about where I was at, because it was tricky at times to balance Alice and Nellie, and to decide how their stories were similar, how they were different, what I wanted to say without trying to make it. Also is a novel. It's a story. I wanted it to be readable. So, there was a lot of great exploration that went into this book for me. So, and because I worked on it over a number of years, I had time to adjust with it, to change my views with it, to see what was happening in the world, and to think about the implications of that. So that was how this book came to be. Yes.
Karma, we actually have a question that's come in from Stephanie.
Okay.
She says she loved Recipe for a Perfect Wife, and she wants to know, did you have the novel plotted out, or did it organically evolve? So basically, did you know the ending from the outset?
Yeah. Okay. What's so funny, Stephanie, with this book, I actually did know the ending, although I was saying earlier that I did shift it a little bit, but I had a pretty clear idea of how I wanted things to end, which has never happened to me before with a book. I had a clear idea of Nellie's trajectory and her character arc, but Alice was really hard for me. And so the plotting for Alice, it took a long time. It took a lot of editing and brainstorming with my editor, a lot of back and forth, and thinking about, who she was and what she wanted, and how to make her a little more likable maybe in the beginning, so that people could actually, hear her perspective and where she was coming from. So, because I know, I was saying this before, there's somebody here on this call who did not like Alice, and it's fine. Lots of people don't like her. I was saying I get some angry emails about Alice, actually, in particular. And even my mom, who is, in her 70s, when she first read the book very early on, and she's fairly traditional, she called me and she said, I do not like the way that Alice is treating Nate, because he's very nice and he's doing all these things for her, and she's sort of being a bit selfish. And so it gave me this chance to have a really interesting conversation also with my mom about, why do you villainize Alice when Nate's also doing some things that perhaps are not super awesome. So, it's just, Alice was hard, and I'm proud of her, as much as she really gets under people's skin. I think some people, I think that, she was an interesting character to write, and has been an interesting character to talk about, because her story is a little less obvious, a little less black and white than Nellie's, for sure, through the story. So I always have an outline when I write a book, and that was true of this book as well. But the characters, I don't believe in writer's block. I do think that if you get stuck, it's probably because you're trying to make your characters do something that they don't want to do. And there is this weird point where characters get their own life. And if you stop listening to them and you force them into your plot outline and they don't want to do it, then you get what people call writer's block. That's my perspective. And usually it just requires a shift. So I do plot, but then I let the story go. I just try to feel it out as I'm going, because you can fix everything later too. So, yeah. Were there any other questions as we were discussing?
Yeah, there was also a follow-up question saying, which character did you like writing best?
Oh, which character did I like writing best? I really loved writing Nellie. I think she, as I said, in some ways she was more obvious because her story, it's easier to be sympathetic towards her and the decisions she makes. But it was really fun to do the research for that time period and to go back there and to not just look at how women were treated in those days or what the expectations were, but also just the fashion and what the homes looked like and what people were doing for work. It was fun to write that part of the story. And she was less angsty for me, for sure, than Alice, but I'm appreciative of Alice for that, because it should be hard. I mean, it's supposed to be hard. Writing a book is supposed to be hard. I tell myself this all the time. I'm trying to write one right now, and it is hard. And I'm like, well, it's always going to be hard, so it's okay. And I also liked writing Miriam and Sally, I should say. They were special characters for me because they were really mother role models for these younger women, and they had so much wisdom and life experience to offer, and reminded me of my mom and my grandmother, and so they were fun characters to write too. I have a soft spot for them. So.
And someone has asked, I don't know if this is maybe a sequel's harder or easier, but someone wants to know if there's a sequel to the book where we learn how Alice and Nellie go on with their lives, and they finished the book and they really missed them.
There isn't a sequel. The book I'm writing next, Nellie pops up in one scene, one time, just as like a little Easter egg in there, because the book I'm writing next is set in the 70s and in the present day. So Nellie will show up when there's 1970s feminism going on. She's going to be there. But I know what happens to them after this book. Sometimes what I'll say, because I know not everyone may have read it, and so I will say, send me an email and I will send you what happens to Nellie and Alice after you've turned that last page. So I sort of write a little bit beyond in my own head for my characters, because I like to wrap it up too, but you can't always wrap everything up in a nice bow for the end of a novel. There's a point where you've reached the end, and that's when you stop. But there's often a little more after. Everyone's okay. I can say that. Everyone ends up in the place they want to be, doing the things they want to be doing. If you want to know, send me an email. It's karma@karmakbrown.com, and I will happily let you know. So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and we've had a comment come in, which maybe you can speak to as well, and let us know if some of maybe Alice's journey and Nellie's as well as part of your experience. But Colleen commented that when she moved from the city to Georgetown, she found herself seeing a lot less of her friends that she had back in the city. And so she just said she really related to that part of the book. So was that something that you also related to?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up on a farm, hippie parents, which is how I got my name. And I had just my sister to hang out with, and we had a great time, but I really wanted to live in the city, to live in a big city and have that urban life. And as soon as I finished university, I moved to Toronto, and loved living in Toronto. And I met my husband there, and we lived there for a while, had our daughter there. And then we moved to the burbs, and it made sense to move to the burbs because we shared this like driveway with our neighbors where you had to back your car out and put your mirrors in because it was so narrow trying to get out. And we were very close to Bloor Street, and our daughter was young and she was a runner. And so it was often scary being up there trying to shop because she would take off. So there were all these really good reasons to move that made sense for our family. But I cried. We moved out to Oakville, we bought our house, and then I cried all the way back to Toronto after we bought our house. And my husband was like, I feel like this is not something we should have done. But, you know, it was that shift. And we've been out here for a long time now, and I love a lot of things about living in the suburbs. But I will say that I do miss the city. I think that there are aspects of it that, you know, definitely with Alice, I related to that part of it, you know, you are then a little bit more removed from your friends, especially friends that I had who were really important to me when my daughter was first born, you know, my support network, friends who knew me before I became a mom. And it does feel like a loss. And you can't always replace that once you're then out in what I call the boonies, but it's not the boonies. We live in Oakville. I mean, it's like, it's a city, you know, half an hour from Toronto, so it's okay. But yeah, I did relate to that. With Nellie, I share nothing with her. I'm not a gardener. I am a terrible gardener, actually. My mom is a beautiful gardener, so I spent a lot of time asking her questions and Googling things about grow cycles, and I mean, I learned a lot. But I still don't think I could grow a garden, even though I've done the research now. I am very skilled on the knowledge, but I don't know that I can put it into practice. I do love to bake, so I probably share that with Nellie. But the rest of her life is she's a character who I made up, who, you know, fit in that time and fit the role that I needed her to fit for that book. So yeah, but I do share a few things with Alice. Not a lot of it, but some of it for sure. And I think that's normal when we're writing. You know, we look for, there's a funny scene in the beginning where she's a little angry at Nate because he's using her gold-plated tweezers to pluck his nose hairs. And my husband read the book, and he stopped and he put it down and he was like, "Is that me?" I was like, yeah, that's you. So, you know, we do put little bits of our life into our books sometimes. Are there other questions? Do you want me to keep going? I can show.
Well, actually, you mentioned the baking. There was one baking related question.
Yeah.
Which is, have you made all of the recipes in the book? And if so, which was your favorite?
I have not made all of them because I'm a vegetarian, so I have not made the meatloaf. I mean, I have made meatloaf in the past, but I haven't made this meatloaf exactly. And the chicken a la king was my grandmother's recipe, so I haven't made it in years, again, unless I buy tofu chicken. Is probably not going to happen in my kitchen. But I would say my daughter and I made the baked Alaska, and it's likely the trickiest one in the book, because the whole thing about the ice cream, and I mean, our version surely looked more like Alice's version than Nellie's version, no question. But it was fun, and it was actually pretty tasty, but it was not that pretty. But we tried. I will say, if anyone ever tries to bake anything, I've had so many questions about this. Sweet milk is one of the ingredients that's often used in some of these vintage recipes. And I've had people send me notes saying, I used sweetened condensed milk, and it was inedible. Like, I could not eat it because it was so sweet. So sweet milk in these old recipes is actually just whole milk. It's homogenized. So not sweetened condensed, which will definitely make the recipe taste terrible. But yeah, so we've made the busy day cake. The boiled chocolate cookies are a recipe that I grew up with. I haven't made the rose caramels. I should try those. So yeah, I've made some of them, but not all. So I like hearing it though. If you make any of the recipes, let me know. I think the chocolate chip cookies are probably the one that people make the most. I get a lot of notifications on Instagram with plates of the cookies and the book, which I love to see. So this is actually the So this is the book that really started it all, the Purity Flower Cookbook. And I don't know if anyone recognizes this book. I see a few heads nodding, but it was from the 1940s, and Purity Flower Company was a Canadian flour company, and they put out this cookbook. My copy is, I mean, it is like truly falling apart, but it even smells, it just has that old book smell. Anyway, I love it so much. It's one of my most prized possessions. But this was the book that I based Nellie's cookbook on. And there are a couple of recipes out of this one, like the Busy Day cake came out of this one, and a version of the cookie also came out of this one. So that was my, that was the book that really got me thinking about the idea of having this woman with this cookbook and a secret in this old house. I also, I really have this, I'm going to do this one day, but I am obsessed with haunted house stories, and I love reading them. I really want to write one. And so the house in this book was more haunted than it ends up in the final version, because my editor was like, whoa, we got to pull back. This is not a haunted house story. We have to pull back on that. But I was able to leave a few of those, that feeling in there about how the house has almost like memories of Nellie, which it then is giving and infusing into Alice and into her life. But I do, I think because I grew up in this really old farmhouse that was supposedly haunted. I mean, people had come out to do some paranormal testing on it, and we had this old photograph of people who had lived in the house years before that for some reason had been left, and my parents left it up, and the eyes would follow you. And I will never forget just walking through our living room and watching the eyes follow me. So I do feel like when people live in a house, and when a house has history, that the experiences of the people who are in the house sort of bleed into the walls and live in this house. And I know not everyone will agree with this, but this is how I view these spaces and these homes that we live in. And we have all these joys and tragedies and other things that happen in these homes. And so with this house that was Nellie's, that she loved so much, I wanted some of her to still exist in the walls of that house, so that Alice, had that sense of her beyond just the cookbook, beyond the decor that was still there, that there was more of Nellie in that house than probably my editor even wanted, to be honest. But I pushed and I got to keep it. So that's okay. That was good. And maybe I'll write a haunted house story one day. But any questions, or should I keep chit-chatting away?
We've got another question that's come in. It's a bit in a different direction, but they want to know, who are your favorite authors, and what soon-to-be published book are you excited about?
Oh, this is so hard. I get asked this question every time, and I never come prepared. You'd think that I would come prepared. I read so much, and books are my very favorite thing. One of the authors who I really love is Lauren Groff. She wrote Fates and Furies, and most recently she wrote a short story collection called Florida. She's just a spectacular writer. I have to choose when I read her stuff, because I have a hard time writing after I read what she's written. But I'm also John Irving I met him last year, which was a highlight of my life, because I have been a huge John Irving fan for most of my life. And he was just the nicest guy, and chatted with me, and I was all starstruck and trying to be calm and very, book smart. And he kept talking about Steve, his friend Steve, who is Stephen King. And it was like, this is just surreal. So, I think A Prayer for Owen Meany is probably one of my favorite books of all time. I also just read, there's a woman named Helen Phillips, and she wrote a book called The Need, which, if you're into books about motherhood and women, and this one is like really fascinating. It's a bit speculative, so it's on a different plane, but it was amazing. And then I have some great author friends who are in Toronto. Jennifer Robson, who wrote The Gown. I'm sure a lot of you know who she is. Somewhere in France, she's a historical fiction author, and she just writes beautiful books. And Marissa Stapley, her recent one was The Last Resort. Another great, like, just commercial fiction Canadian author. And one more, I don't know if anyone has watched the Netflix show, I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Ian Reid is the author. He's Canadian. It just got made into a movie, his debut. But he writes sort of like creepy horror-like stuff, and love his books, really different. So yeah, that's a very mini list. I have so many. I need to be prepared better for this question. So that was books that what am I looking forward to the most? Oh, I don't know. You know, the publishing schedule has shifted a lot this year because of COVID. And so a lot of books that were supposed to come out have been moved to different publishing cycles. So everything's a little all over the place. I might have to think about that one. I don't know. Has anyone read Mexican Gothic? I don't see any hands. I'm on a bit of a horror kick right now. I think because COVID is so awful that I want to read something that's even worse. So horror fits that bill. It's not, I won't cry, you know, I don't need to cry. So yeah, if anyone has a great horror suggestion, please put it in the chat box. I would like to know. Or short stories. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, we just had one come in from Roseanne, and she says that one of the themes our book club discussed when reading the book was how domesticity and the responsibilities in and around the home can be limiting for women. Was that something you were trying to explore, and what are your thoughts on that whole idea?
Well, this is a big one to unpack. How much time do we have? I have so many feelings about this, and you know, I have even more feelings about this now because of COVID, because a lot of my friends who are moms and working and trying to write are really have been sort of forced out of the workforce to some degree because the kids have been home. And a lot of those domestic tasks have then fallen back onto women because they're the ones who have taken a step back from work to get back in and be with the kids. And, you know, this is a global pandemic. And so we all need to shift how we're doing things and what we're doing. But, you know, in the early days of it, I actually think I had COVID, but I couldn't get tested. But I was quite sick, and my husband was then taking care of everything. And his business had shut down, so he was home. And suddenly he was like doing all the cooking, and then he was all irritated that stuff was not being put away, you know, in its proper place all the time. And because he was suddenly home and seeing all of that. And so it was interesting for our relationship in terms of how those tasks get split, because I do work from home and he works outside of the house. And so as we were raising our daughter, you know, I was home with her. I was working, but I was also the person who was doing doctor's appointments and grocery runs and everything else. So, you know, it did shift that for us. It is just such a tough question. I feel like women, and it's not just me, this is backed up through lots of studies, but, you know, even when you have two people who work out of the home, like a male and female spouse, they work the same number of hours outside of the house. The woman is usually the one who is taking on the majority of the tasks at home on top of all the hours that she's working. And so when you see that and you know that that's happening, and then you look back at the 50s and you look back at, you know, it was just more out in the open back then. I mean, I don't think we're back at that stage of things, but I do think there is a risk of going backwards unless we really focus on this idea that these tasks should be shared. You know, I did a lot of those domestic tasks because logistically for our family, that made sense. But this idea, you know, my daughter was younger, she had made I didn't want to make dinner, and I made some comment about not wanting to make dinner again, Groundhog Day. And she was like, well, what will we eat? Like, you're the mom, you cook. And I was like, oh, no, now we're having eggs. and then we're going to have a talk. So it has given me a lot of opportunity to have conversations with her, even in writing this book, to really reinforce this idea that just because you are a woman does not mean that you are exceptionally skilled at domestic tasks. That is not how this works. That is something that is archaic and not true. And at the same time, if you choose to do those tasks, that is how you want to spend your time, it's what makes sense for your family, then that's feminist too, because it's a choice. And so it's just, I think, when the choice is removed or the expectation is there, that's where the problem arises. Like I said, that I could go on, and I won't. And now I forget the question almost, because I've gone off on a rant. So I'm very sorry about that. But I have a lot of feelings about this.
I think they just wanted to know if it was something you were trying to explore. So
yeah, it was something I was trying to explore, continue to explore, talk about a lot. Because once you get in it, it's really hard to back away. And especially having a daughter, I feel very compelled to allow her to have a different experience with that, so that expectation is not there. She can choose to do whatever she wants. And if that means doing all the domestic tasks at home, then go for it. That's great. But again, I want it to be the choice. So I do see a question here. Is it possible to please have them listed in this chat? Oh, okay. This is probably not for me. I'm looking at the chat box and.
Yes, actually, that was the one question that came through. So we won't be able to do it tonight in the chat, but we will be posting this on YouTube, and we can definitely have that in the comments there as follow-up. Someone else also gave you a horror suggestion in private messages.
Yeah.
So they're saying check out the author Sarah Waters or the book Let the Right One In.
Okay. Sarah Waters wrote, I feel like I read her first book. It's set in an old haunted house. It's who made this suggestion? Now I almost need to Google it because it was one of my favorite books. So, okay, yes, that's a great suggestion. I've only read one of her books, and I do think it's the same author. So thank you, because that just reminded me how much I loved her first book, so I need to go look it up. Okay, done. Yes, thank you.
And then someone else, Colleen, has put in a comment saying, I grew up on a farm in the boonies as well, and I find that even still in the domestic areas, people and families are still very old-fashioned. Do you find that as well? Is it more old-fashioned in the rural areas?
Yeah, I would say for sure. Even in the suburban areas. I mean, most of the people in my neighborhood are stay-at-home moms who don't work outside of the home. And so there is, it is sometimes a challenge because my daughter goes to school and then I basically write books. And so my days look very different. And the challenges I have are actually quite different. Also trying to manage both, even though I'm working, at home. But yeah, I do think, especially out in the more rural areas, smaller towns, there is some of that still exists. And I was not that long ago, a few months ago on Twitter, I saw a post come through from a woman. This was in the US, so this is very different, but she was talking about how she had been to see her obstetrician, her gynecologist, and she wanted to get her tubes tied. And the gynecologist would not do it for her until her husband signed the form. So she needed his permission in 2020 in order to make this decision for her body. And of course, she was obviously furious by this, and it generated a lot of conversation on Twitter, but it was like, wow, I mean, if that just doesn't show that we have not really come as far as we think, I don't know what does. So yeah, I think there are a lot of these old beliefs held and the expectations of society. It is still there. We've made progress, but we have a long way to go. And that's also for, white women. I mean, when you're talking about women of color, it is an entirely different conversation and a much more serious and difficult conversation. So, it's we have a long way to go.
And actually, one of the comments that's come in from Roseanne just says, is it old-fashioned or is it related to socioeconomic issues? And just acknowledging that women of limited means have worked for a very long time. And then she came back with great point after you kept talking.
Yeah. I think it's probably, I mean, there are so many factors that go into it. I'm reading a book right now called Hood Feminism. I don't know if anyone has read it. It is a hard book to read. I read it in chunks and put it down because you really do have to confront, as a white woman who is a feminist, you have to confront what it means to be a white feminist and how you are actually leaving a lot of women behind by just, with your feminism. And so that has been eye-opening for me. And just if anyone's looking to dive a little further into that topic and really, just have a different perspective, it's called Hood Feminism. And I would recommend it, even if it is it's tough read, and it's US based again. So there are some differences between the US and Canada, obviously. Obviously we have a few big differences, but yeah. Any other questions?
So that looks like everything for now. So if you want to chit chat for a little bit more, we'll see what comes in.
I will chit chat more. I have more books because I love these cookbooks, and I always like to show them because I see people going, oh, I have a book like that. But these are the holiday cookbooks, the Better Homes and Gardens. This one, it has some really disgusting things on the front. I don't even know what this is. It's like a olive wrapped with bacon with some of those little tiny sausages, those little hot dogs. What are they called? I don't know. The cocktail wieners. Oh my God, it's a terrible name. But anyway, there's that one. And then this was another one I took some recipes from or had some inspiration for the recipes. But this is the desserts cookbook. So you can see all the very fancy desserts. I have no idea what this one is down here. Looks like a pistachio pie. I did realize how much Jell-O featured in a lot of the recipes back in the 50s. One of the worst recipes I saw, and I wish I could unlearn this one, but it was tuna, like a can of tuna mixed with lemon Jell-O. And then you just, let it become gelatinous in the fridge, and then you slice it. And this is what people would eat. I can't understand why anyone would want to eat that. But Jell-O was everywhere in everything. Everyone ate a lot of Jell-O. Molds, Jell-O molds specifically. And what was interesting about this Betty Crocker one, and some of the tips, so when I was writing at the beginning of every chapter, so for Alice's chapter, there is a piece of old-fashioned advice for women or on marriage. Those are all true. I took them all from old magazines, from old books, and then in Nellie's chapters, it was all recipes, right? So the recipe would feature in her story for that chapter. But some of the tips that, if you're feeling tired, lie down on the ground for a few minutes and then you carry on with your vacuuming. There's a whole section in this Betty Crocker cookbook about, it's called Special Helps, and here it is. It's the yellow side. And it just lists all the things that if you're tired from your housework, for housewives, to make it easier for them, like to wear comfortable clothes. And if you feel tired, lie down and relax for 3 to 5 minutes before you get up and start your, vacuuming again or your dusting. And then alternate sitting down tasks and standing up tasks. And having good posture prevents fatigue, and make sure that you harbor pleasant, happy thoughts, because that will make everything better if you're feeling positive. So it's just so, it's reading those and then finding the right chapter with Alice to put those pieces in. Some of them are just so shocking to me to read. Some of them are funny, but then they're not really funny because you realize that this was the advice of the time. And this is what, again, was expected of women at that time. So, one of the most interesting things I learned when I was researching this and really seeing, like, how did women kind of end up back in the kitchen? Because when the men went to war, the women were pulled out of the home and they were actually working and doing the jobs that the men had held and had this independence and freedom that they hadn't had before. And then the men came home from the war and the women went straight back into the kitchen and back into the homes. And then it took another decade or so, a little bit longer, for that second wave of feminism to come and start to pull people back out of the kitchen and home again. But yeah, it was just, there was a lot that I didn't know. And so it was an interesting history lesson for me to go back and look at that time period and to see what was really going on, and just think about, you know, how it has changed again and how it hasn't. So there's something here about Jell-O. Jell-O was fast, easy, and cheap. It's true. It freed women from the more time-consuming tasks of baking pies, cakes, and cookies. Yeah. I mean, I do like Jell-O, but I don't like it with tuna. So, which is fair.
And actually, there's another comment that's come in privately. Colleen said, you just reminded her that about the quotes you put in the book, proper wife and a good woman. And she has shared that she showed her husband some of them and he absolutely could not believe it. They made a few jokes, but they were both very shocked and enjoyed that you included those in the novel.
Yeah, it's, you know, I have a friend who sent me a note after, and she said she actually liked them. She felt that she's in a bit more of a traditional role. That is the role that she wants to play. And she actually sort of felt like some of them were applicable. So I was like, okay, well, this is the thing. Everyone is going to take this differently based on where they are in life or what is going on with them at that time. This one was one of my favorites. It's toward the end of the book, but it says, the average man marries a woman who is slightly less intelligent than he is. That's why many brilliant women never marry. They do not come in contact with sufficiently brilliant men, or fail to disguise their brilliance in order to win a man of somewhat less intelligence. That was Dr. Clifford R. Adams' Modern Bride, 1952. So it was a bit of a journey for sure. I see a question here. Should I just read it? I feel like I'm taking your job, Danielle, but I'll just.
No, you can go ahead. If someone wants to put them in publicly, that's fine too.
Okay, it's from Stephanie. If you were to write this novel, but 50 years from now, what differences do you think would there be in women's roles? Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I can tell you what I hope would be different. 50 years. It depends on so many things. Leadership, you know, our political leadership. And right now we are in a bit of a phase with the US where things are going backwards at an alarming rate for women. So I don't know. I don't know. Tell me, Stephanie, what do you think? What do you think would be happening 50 years from now? I mean, my hope is that we have equality, that women truly have equality, and all women, not just white women, but all women have reached equality, and we are getting paid the same amount, dollar per dollar, as our male counterparts. The domestic tasks are shared, that there is no assumption about things like taking last names, or if you become a mother, you have to then choose between having children and having a career. You know, one of the things that gets discussed a lot when I have these conversations is whether women can have it all, and what I think about that. And I think that probably 20 years ago, I would have said that yes, women can have it all. But now that I'm older and I'm a mother and I have a career and have, you know, I'm married, I would say that women can have it all, but not all at the same time. So I think that you can have this killer career and you can have a family, but you can't necessarily do it all at once. I think that whole lean in and you know, find that balance is not realistic. So, and if anyone's figured out how to do that, then please tell me, or write a book about it, because a lot of women would like to know how that's done. So I do think that is something that really makes us quite different from men. And it is a frustrating thing. There's also a lot of gifts in that, lessons to be learned, but yeah. So there's a further question from Stephanie, or comment saying, do you think 50 years from now, people would be flabbergasted by the concept of the 1950s housewife? I hope so. But history is weird, and we could end up back in a place where we're back into 1950s housewifery. I don't know. I hope that's not the case. I am keeping my fingers crossed, and I'm going to do my part. Yeah. And do what I can for sure, and raise my daughter to not accept that, that's not good enough. So, yeah.
And Roseanne commented privately as well that she thinks what made the novel so interesting was that it explores the issue of how uneven family responsibilities are. She commented, things won't change in 50 years until domestic responsibilities are truly shared.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And the only way that that's going to happen is, it's like the next generation. I do think the generations coming after me, the millennials, have a better sense of balance and self-care. And I hope that we're moving a little closer to that, it is okay to be a bit selfish. And to want the things that you want, and to go after those things. And, you don't have to have children, and you don't have to be married. And those are not things that, every woman should have to do. So I hope that that's the direction we're moving in. Again, just free choice and equality across the board. There is a comment. Have you ever read Fed Up? Yes, I haven't read it, but I know this book. It's Gemma Hartley, I think, right? It's a great book that actually gives methods to make things more equal in your daily life. I should read it. Although we're pretty good. I think, my husband, he definitely wants to help. Like, he knows I have a career too. And so we really do share that partnership as best we can. It's not always even, but sometimes that is life, right? It can't always be even sometimes in a house and have things work out. But yeah, so but you do have to communicate. I think that is the biggest issue, that what happened with Nate and Alice is a lack of communication. And, their marriage was not really on a solid foundation because they did not know how to talk to each other about what they wanted. So that was their biggest thing. They don't, they shouldn't be married. I'll just say that. Selfish is not taking care of yourself and finding balance. I don't understand this. Selfish is not taking care of yourself and finding balance. Well, okay, am I reading this the wrong way? I feel like it's saying that it's not selfish to take care of yourself and look for balance. I don't know who sent this question in. If that's what you're saying, I totally agree. Yeah, it's not selfish, but it's viewed as selfish, particularly for women. So I think that women and men are viewed differently when they make these decisions. It's the same, with my mom saying, why is Nate, I don't like how I don't like how Alice is treating him. It's like, well, why do we villainize the woman and not the man when they're doing the same thing? This happens a lot in books and in novels, and it's a discussion point that often comes up. But, that is an issue that I think we all have to really think about. Why is it worse for one gender and not the other to ask for that time, or to demand that space to be able to do that thing they want to do? And this is Stephanie saying, a man would not be called selfish to want to pursue his dreams. Exactly. He would be called ambitious. So this is the other thing, right? A man who wants to pursue his dream is ambitious. A woman is probably selfish because she's having to make a choice between maybe having children and then going after a career. So, these are it's the pink blue jobs. It's the different way that people are categorized based on gender. Those are all, I realize that Recipe for a Perfect Wife is just a book, and it is meant to be fictional. It's meant to be enjoyed as a read. I am definitely not trying to make like a big political statement with it, but it was something that couldn't be ignored. And that was a really important theme through the book, was this idea of women and the legacy of women and women's voices. And, how can we be louder and be heard better? So, yeah, I feel like that's ending it on a bit of a heavy note. So I'm terrible at telling jokes, so I can't tell a joke. What can I say? Does anyone have like a fun question to end on, or you know, I can talk about the fact that I get up at 5 a.m. It's so interesting with these events because I'm normally pretty much in bed by now because I get up at 5 to write every day. So I have an event on the West Coast and it starts at 10 p.m. and goes until 11. And it's actually to discuss my nonfiction book, which is about getting up at 5 a.m. to write. So I sort of wanted to send a note and say, you do know that this book is about getting up at 5, right? So anyway. The Lions of Fifth Avenue, which is a book by Fiona Davis. I don't know if anyone has read that. Another great dual narrative, dual timeline, feminist book. It's set in the Manhattan Public Library, and it's a great book. Fiona is a great writer. So yeah, Fiona Davis. It's called The Lions of Fifth Avenue. It just came out, I think, about a month ago. So that's another great suggestion. Similar, if you enjoy that dual narrative and dual timeline type of story. So, and if anyone has any other horror suggestions or great books, put them up and maybe Danielle can get them to me somehow, but I'm always looking for great reads too. So this has been fun. I don't know, are there any other questions? Does anyone have any last minute questions about anything? Jello is fun. Okay, Jello is fun. I don't know who put that up, but
we did have one question come in that might be a good one to end on.
Sure.
So you've written a couple other books as well. And so the question was, of all the books you've written, do you have a favorite or, one that's closest to you?
I would probably say Come Away With Me, which is my debut, is probably the book of my heart. I think, I really love Recipe for a Perfect Wife for a lot of reasons. And from a writing perspective, this has been the most enjoyable one for me to write. But my debut is just, it is sad and it is heartfelt and it has a twist that you won't see coming, but I love that book. So yeah, maybe because it's my first one, I don't know. But I probably get the most mail about that book. Still now, even 5 years later, I get a lot of messages about it. So, but only read it if you don't mind crying. You need that cathartic cry. That's the book to read. So, yeah.
Yes, and Colleen actually added that the ending of that book was unreal. So for those of you who haven't read it, you can go out and take a look.
Yeah, it has, yeah. It's not the book you think it is. We'll just say that. I won't say anything more, but thank you from Stephanie. I love all your novels. Thank you so much. This was great fun. I really appreciate everyone being here tonight. I know in these like COVID times and not being able to get out to events and see people, like this is a great alternative. It's not perfect. And, it'd be so fun to see you all. I can see you on my screen, but, to see you out in the audience. But I'm always very thankful for people taking the time to come and listen to me talk on and on and on about things actually often. But yeah, it was fun. Great questions. Thank you. Any other questions? I always feel like there's just one more. Oh, Colleen's reading The Life Lucy Knew. Thank you, Colleen.
Yes, there seems to be quite a few recommendations coming in, so I'll make sure you get those.
Awesome. Can't wait.
And with that, on behalf of the Halton Hills Public Library and the Friends of the Halton Hills Public Library, I want to thank you, Karma, very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank everyone who joined us on Zoom. You will be receiving an email later this week, and it will include a survey. And we would absolutely love if you could provide some feedback and thoughts on how the event went. This is a format where we're hoping to continue, so anything that you can provide us with would be very helpful. I also just wanted to note as well that we have a events calendar on our website, and we've recently made an update to it that you can now search both for programs that are happening in the branches, but there's also now an option to search for virtual events as well. So you'll want to keep an eye on that because we do have some lectures we're working on for later this fall. And I also wanted to note as well that we have a Halton Hills Public Library YouTube channel. Now that features reading recommendations, some tech tutorials, and we also put up recordings of our special events, such as this event with Karma Brown. So head over there, you can subscribe to us. We'll be putting some things on there. And I will note, because Karma, you might be interested as well, we have an event coming up with a professor from the University of Guelph, and the marketing will be coming out soon, but she'll be talking actually about food history and about what it was like to be a wife on a tobacco farm in southwestern Ontario and having to cook for all the farm hands along with the family. So keep an eye out for that event. I believe it's called Kitchen to Kiln, and that marketing will be coming soon. And yeah, thank you everyone. I see lots of comments in the chat box saying it was a great event. They enjoyed it very much, and we're happy you were able to participate. So thank you very much, and please enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.